views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, when you get dressed for that big night out, did you know that fashion is governed by a strict set of laws and that many in the fashion industry never even protect their designs? Tonight, we bring on an expert to help us thread the needle as we tackle the law governing fashion. Next up, deportations are more common than ever. It's a tough time to be in this country illegally. Do you have any rights? We discuss immigration and all issues relating to deportation with an attorney on set. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. And welcome to Today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us at Facebook at Today's Verdict and check us out at bronxnet.tv. One goal for a seller in the fashion district is the ability to grow a brand, but it also requires them to focus on their legalities of the fashion industry. This industry is always changing, and so are the laws that govern. But no worries, joining us today is attorney Rania Sedhom, who's going to help us guide us through. Rania, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, as we spoke a little bit on set, I want to take us from the perspective of someone who has a mom and pop fashion store downstairs and someone who has a Stella McCartney across the street with a national, maybe an international presence. So let's start with that small store that's ready to sell some jeans or some shirts to the community. What's the first thing they start to think about when they want to go into this kind of business?
Well, there's actually a lot to think about. The first, who is your consumer? Who do you want to sell to? Because children's clothing are governed by different rules than adult clothing, for example, particularly when you're exporting and importing those clothes. So one of the first questions I ask is, where are you making these clothes? Are you doing it here? Are you shipping it from Mexico or China or Indonesia?
Now, if you're making it, let's say, overseas, or you're getting it from overseas, are there international laws that you have to comply with as well? Does it get very tricky, or am I really making it more difficult than it is?
There can be, depending on the materials that you're using. So some jeans can be quite luxurious, right? They can have embellishments. Let's say you're using some kind of snakeskin embellishment. You may have a hard time moving that jean from coast to coast, even in the United States. You may not be able to get your jeans into California, for example.
Gotcha. So let's say, all right, so now they know where, maybe they're selling a little of both. Some children, some to parents. They know where they're getting it from. What's the next thing that they have to look out for? Is there something else? Are they incorporating? What are you doing that might be any different than any other store in, let's say, the 5 boroughs?
Yeah, you should certainly incorporate, because the act of incorporating essentially separates your personal money from the money of your business. Okay. And if you are sued, you do want to limit your liability to whatever amount of money is left in your operating account. Absolutely. So certainly incorporate, but I'm using that in the vernacular. Okay. If you have a limited liability company, you're not technically incorporated, but I just mean have a presence other than you. So I wouldn't be Rania Sedhom Jeans. I would pick something else.
So let's say you have your brand, right? Or you're selling somebody else's brand. Are you going to differentiate and decide, well, I should copyright maybe my own productions? Do I have to make sure that I'm not copying somebody else's clothing before I sell it? I even see people taking pictures of other windows in the city of fashion and then deciding to make their own clothes that look very much like that. How does this even work?
Yes, I call that being overly inspired sometimes, when something looks very similar to something else. What is really protected are the textiles. Right. Sometimes you might see a very unique pattern and you notice it right away. That is something you can protect. Otherwise, what's protected is the name of your brand and or your logo. That's why oftentimes you'll see a couture dress and then you'll see another dress that's substantially similar. You may think it's exactly the same, but it will fit slightly differently. The material will certainly be different as well.
And that's all you need to show some kind of difference and not be held on the hook legally.
Yes, you have to have a difference. I mean, there are a lot of lawsuits right now between household names like Gucci and other household names like H&M because of stripes, for example.
Okay.
So you need to ask yourself, when I look at this thing, does it remind me of something else? And if it does, don't do it.
Okay. So, all right, so now you have your store, you're making
Right.
some money, and you're selling adult, children clothing, and you want to start a little pop-up store on the side. How does that work? Because you find out these pop-up stores or the sample sales.
Right. There are a lot of contracts behind that, actually. Even if you're selling someone else's product, that's perfectly fine, as long as you have a contract that allows you to do that. And in that contract will include the right for you to use their logo, right? So it's the same thing in a pop-up. You have to get permission to sell whatever brands you're selling. If it's your own brand, obviously that's easier. And then you need yet another contract for the lease of the space for a day, 3 days, a week, however long your pop-up is for.
Now, from what I can see, certainly in Manhattan, a lot of these stores go in and out.
Yes.
Some of the fashion stores don't make it more than maybe a year, 2 years.
Right.
Why is that? Is it just the nature of the business? Tell me what your thoughts on that.
Well, competition is certainly fierce at all price points. So, gone are the days where you could say, okay, I don't want to spend that much. I'm going to this store, and I only have 2 options. I mean, you have so many options now. You have to have a point of view, and you have to stand for something, whatever that thing is. Do you want to be the luxury jean company and only sell jeans at, $700 and up? That's your choice. Do you want to be the jean company that only uses sustainable products? Fantastic. That's your choice. You have to have a voice. A lot of these companies don't. They just sell anything.
Okay, so let's take that Stella McCartney that I was talking about. Now it's really a national brand, maybe international.
It's international. It's actually owned by Kering.
Right.
It's international.
So
Yeah.
what do they do to keep it going? I mean, is it an online presence? Are they selling their clothes more online than in the store? Is there legal issues they have to deal with?
I think with Stella McCartney, and I don't represent her, I have to use this disclaimer, so, and I don't represent any of the Kering brands as another disclaimer.
Fair enough. Spoken like a true attorney.
Yeah.
Also.
I try not to use my clients, so I thank you for asking about Stella McCartney.
Right.
So with a brand like Stella McCartney, you're selling internationally, you're selling online, you're selling in your own specific branded store, the Stella McCartney store, and you're also selling in other stores like multi-brand stores like a Saks Fifth Avenue, like a Bergdorf Goodman. And again, it's about getting your name out and having a point of view. So with Stella McCartney, it's about sustainability. It's also about brand new, fresh ideas of fashion. It's not, the same shirt that she did last year, but this year she just used, ethically sourced products. It's new products, ethically sourced, pro-environment and pro-animal rights. So that's what she stands for.
All right, let's talk litigation for a second. Where do you see most of the disputes developing? Once they're in the store, selling online, something else? Because you do see in the law journal, there's always seems to be some kind of issue
Yes.
between designers. What do you see?
I think it's when a brand wants to branch out and try something new, and they become, as I mentioned earlier, overly inspired by another brand. So something looks substantially similar to something
Let's
else.
say Hermes ties. I don't know what I'm wearing right now, but let's say Hermes ties and what's it called?
Salvatore Ferragamo?
Salvatore Ferragamo. They're looking very similar lately. I know I see them. I look at them. They look very,
Yes.
very similar. But
there are subtle differences.
There's
Like
the subtle differences.
in buckles, maybe the thickness of something. So there are.
Are there lawyers who are there reviewing the ties and making sure that they're not the same as Hermes, or Hermes are not the same as Ferragamo? I mean, how does that work?
Well, there are a lot of secret shoppers out there. For example, I was representing a client that had a very specific look to their handbags. And someone posted a handbag that looked very similar to my client's handbag on Instagram. So my client sent me the picture, and I said, okay, let me figure out where the store is. And it was a small store in Brooklyn. And they purchased these fake handbags from a different country.
Gotcha.
So we then entered into an agreement where they would stop selling it, and I was hesitant to believe them for whatever reason, and I sent someone there to buy these bags that we were told would not be sold anymore.
And you were able to purchase them?
We were able to purchase 6 of them.
And what happens next?
Then we go to battle.
Ensues.
Then we go into a larger battle.
All right,
Yeah.
Let's talk some tips. Someone's watching today, they're thinking of starting their own shop. Okay, they're not a Stella McCartney yet, and they want to sell to the community, Bronx community, anywhere.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody who wants to open up their own clothing store?
Start off with something small. That's really important. I know everybody's looking for that Madison Avenue address or Fifth Avenue address, but that's not really feasible. Even if you want to sell to the Bronx community, don't pick the most expensive avenue. Find a small space with a lot of foot traffic, and then focus on maybe 3 or 4 items, maybe one outfit, something that people can use in multiple ways. Focus on that and do a market, testing of the market. Do people gravitate to your blazers more, to your scarves more? You have to actually focus and pay attention on what people are purchasing and then go from there and expand.
And if you're actually designing the product itself, you know, you're in the back room of the shop and you're creating the ties or something.
Yes.
What advice do you give to make sure that you're not accidentally taking somebody else's, I don't know, colors or schematic?
Well, there are things that you can do. I mean, you can actually go online and look at some stores and see if anything looks like what you're
It'd be nice if there was a
you're
nice
creating.
program if you could just match it,
Yeah.
take a picture of your tie and then that you created.
It's true.
But
It's
it doesn't
true.
work that way.
No, it really doesn't. But pay attention to materials. Pay attention to color wheels. I mean, when you're purchasing a specific handbag or tie, they may not come in 35 colors. So maybe you want to focus on colors that you think are not represented in the marketplace. You want to have more neon, or you want to have, darker shades of purple, whatever it is.
Gotcha.
Find your voice and start slow and
All right, well,
expand.
where do we find you, more importantly?
You can find me near Grand Central Station. You can call me at 212-549-1819, and you can check out my website at www.bespokelawfirm.com.
And as the fashion industry goes, you'll come back and give us some tips,
It
right?
would be my pleasure.
All right, well, we have to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund Reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
And I can't change, even if I try, even if I wanted to. My love, she keeps me warm. 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 She keeps me warm.
We are neighbors and best friends.
I love my sister.
My heart doesn't see race. Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
Love is kind. Love is patient.
All right, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at Today's Verdict. Well, in recent months, illegal immigrants have been living with the fear of deportation. President Trump has taken a hard stance on those in this country illegally, but there may be hope. Well, attorney Kerry Bretz is here to help us guide us through the recent immigration developments. Kerry, there are a lot of very scared people out there. Do they have a reason to be scared?
Well, yeah, we're definitely in new times compared to the Obama administration, which kind of had a set of priorities. The priorities were published, people knew. We knew as deportation defense lawyers who had a risk of being arrested and detained. We don't know that anymore. We have to worry, and so does anybody else who is not documented or not a citizen.
Now, I think what we were talking about a little bit earlier before we got on set has to do with those who are accused of a crime, and that will now affect their immigration status. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Right, so it's become such a hot field. We've created our own word for it that deportation practitioners use, crim-immigration. And the immigration consequences of criminal conduct are not logical. It doesn't make sense. Sometimes a more serious felony has less consequence than a misdemeanor.
I'll stop there for a second, because that sounds ridiculous, but the thought that the worse the crime, you may not affect your immigration status, yet a lesser crime would. How is that even possible?
Well, it's possible because the Immigration and Nationality Act is a complicated scheme that doesn't make sense. And for the last 20 years, starting with the Clinton administration, there's been a lot of legislation that's been litigated, some of it by my firm. And so it's not logical. And then what happens in the criminal defense world, criminal defense lawyers and criminal defendants automatically, instinctively say, I want the misdemeanor, I want no jail time. And sometimes the A felony is better than the A misdemeanor. It sounds insane. So even the people that are representing non-citizen criminal defendants, the judges and the district attorneys don't understand.
Which means before you even plea, you should definitely speak to an attorney, because you may be pleading to something that is a low-level misdemeanor, but it can get you into a lot of trouble when it comes to your immigration status. And had you known this, you wouldn't have pled to it.
Absolutely. So in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a landmark case, Padilla versus Kentucky, said non-citizen criminal defendants have a right to know the immigration consequences. The sadness of that decision is what happens, and it happens here in the Bronx, is that judges give these generic advisals. Sir, you're not a citizen. You know you might be deported. Do you still want to take a plea? Well, might be deported. If I lived here for 20 years and I'm taking a plea to possession of marijuana, I'm saying, I'm not going to be deported. I'll take the plea.
And by the way, when the judges say that, are they mumbling? Is it loudly on the record so that the defendant really understands?
We have argued in doing post-conviction relief cases, going back to criminal court to change the plea because the person didn't understand the real immigration consequence. What we've argued is they need to have a private conversation where they understand. This means that you may not be deported today, but you're going to be deported one day.
And what's the feedback you get on that?
Well, the amount of criminal procedure law 440 motions, that is, we're lucky in New York, you can attack a criminal conviction later on the constitutional theory, is jamming the courts.
All right. DACA. Let's talk DACA. Everyone, the dreamers, are so afraid. Well, talk to us a little bit.
So, look, everybody loves DACA people, right? These are children that came to the U.S., usually not of their own volition. The requirements are that they've attended high school, have a GED or military history. They've been vetted already. Everybody loves DACA people, and nobody has anything bad to say about them, except Congress just can't get it together, right? But outside of the DACA people, you have millions of people who didn't come here when they were a child. They came here when they were 20. And they opened up businesses, and they produced 2 or 3 citizen children. And their children, by the way, might be the ones actually getting the scholarships and doing really well in school, besides working in the family business. And there's nothing being spoken about for them. We really need true, comprehensive immigration reform that I think we can all agree. If you're, got a serious criminal history, we don't want you. But if you're here and you're contributing, and you look at any immigrant community, not just in New York City, every part of the U.S. now. You can go to any rural area, Alabama, Virginia. There's immigrants in business adding to the economy.
All right, let's get back to the poor, unfortunate soul who is caught up in it could be maybe a drug sting or something else that happens in a car. When the car gets pulled over, there's a gun or something, and you're there, even though it's not your drugs, it's not your gun, but somehow you're looped into the whole group. They come and see you. What happens next?
Well, if you're a non-citizen, you cannot accept a plea to anything without understanding the full immigration consequences. That's number one. But if you wind up pleading, you have no choice, and ICE identifies you either because you're in the jail system or through their own database they figured out where you live, and we hear all these stories where ICE comes out at 6 o'clock in the morning and knocks on your door.
But does that happen? Do they look for you once you have that felony that puts you on their radar, or that misdemeanor? Do they look for you?
Absolutely.
But there's so many people. Who has the
It's
time to do that?
It's a high priority. They will spend, the special agents will spend a week investigating, and then they go out for a week. They'll stop at the 4-4 precinct in the morning, say hello to the sergeant, say these are the 10 people we're looking for. They always go for 10 or 12 because if they get 6, they've accomplished something.
Okay. You know, we were talking about something called a notice to appear. We're going to get into some legal terms or some issues. What does that mean?
The notice to appear is funny. It doesn't necessarily have a date on it to appear in court, but it is the charging document in immigration court. It's equivalent to the criminal complaint. It's the allegations. You're not a citizen of the U.S. You're a native and citizen of the Dominican Republic. You entered the U.S. at an unknown place and unknown time. Therefore, you are deportable.
And this notice to appear, does it come via? Are you personally served? Are you? Is it in the mail? I mean, what do you?
You're onto a super hot topic. You would think, like we have this great criminal procedure law in New York and civil procedure law in New York, it can be served by regular mail. And if you don't get it, well, and then it gets scheduled for a hearing and you don't show up, you might wind up with a deportation or removal order in absentia.
It's almost because you didn't answer it. So the court's saying, all right, well, you must be. The allegations must be true, the underlying allegations, so we're going to pick you up and we're going to send you back
Correct.
to the DR.
And there's got to be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who have these orders and don't know.
Once you get the notice to appear, what happens next? Are you, let's assuming we get an attorney here. What happens to you next? Do you put in an answer to it? I'm not quite sure how this works.
Well, you appear in court in the same way that you would appear on a criminal case.
Which court?
Well, here in almost from here to Buffalo, the only 2 courts are at 26 Federal Plaza, which covers almost all of New York State, and Newark, New Jersey, which covers all of New Jersey. Those are the 2 courts. So if you live, in Poughkeepsie, you're going to have to come down to 26 Federal Plaza. If you're out in the Hamptons, you're going to have to come to 26 Federal Plaza. The court system, by the way, is jammed, packed. 6 or 8 months between hearing dates. The judges are doing 50 or 60 cases a day in multiple languages with multiple issues. The court system is jammed. And this is largely because this administration thinks it's a good idea to place everybody who they encounter in proceedings. Whereas the Obama administration said, look, no criminal history, we're going to exercise prosecutorial discretion and close the case. But you come to court, and the government most of the time has the burden to prove those allegations, which leads me to something I wanted to mention earlier. People think it's a good idea when they're not documented to walk around with their passport because it's an identity document, or their driver's license from back home, or their cedula. It's a bad idea.
Why is it a bad idea?
Well, because then the burden switches from the government to you to prove that you belong here or that you're authorized to be here. If you remain silent, the government has to prove that you are not lawful here. And that could, eventually they'll probably do it, but that could get you enough time to become eligible for some other form of relief or defense from deportation.
Which would be what kind of other way can you forcibly stay here?
There's a number of them. If you're here for 10 years and no criminal history, and you have a parent, spouse, or a child who is a citizen or resident, and you can show that they would suffer extreme hardship, there's a defense from deportation called cancellation or removal. You get a green card. If you're a victim of a violent crime and you report it to the police and cooperate with the police and are harmed, you can get a green card.
So you can get green cards, not necessarily from status of being attached to a U.S. citizen, or
correct.
You can do it based on hardships or other ways, and most people do not know that.
That's correct.
All right, the deportation process. At some point, unfortunately, you may be found to have violated our immigration laws, and they're going to send you back home. What happens next? How does that work? Do they just put you on the plane? I mean, you don't really know what happens after that.
Right. So we have this big contract business now known as ICE Air. You've litigated your case, you lost, you're detained by ICE, you're in immigration custody here in New York, and let's say you're going to be deported to somewhere in the Caribbean. No longer will you go on a commercial flight. You will go from New York and make your way down to Oakdale, Louisiana, and you will go out on a contract flight in a nasty scenario, handcuffed the whole time by contract personnel and some ICE officers, and then face that humiliation when you get back home.
And by the way, so many, well, when they get back to their home country.
In some countries, they're required, for example, in the Dominican Republic, they mark it on their cedula, their national ID card, and they have to report to the police, and then everybody in the country knows, and it's difficult to get a job, and so on and so forth. In other countries...
But why is that, though? I mean, you left your country to try and come to the United States where you could have a better life. Now you go back to the country, not on your own free will. They send you back. And you're ostracized by your own country, I guess, because of that?
In many places, yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's sad.
That's a real shame.
It's sad. But the whole process has become really dehumanizing, demoralizing. It lacks any amount of dignity. I was a prosecutor for the old INS a million years ago. It was a different set of mores that we operated on.
Well, I think it's just a different time now. The administration, things have changed. All right, so someone's watching now. They just got themselves a notice to appear. Tell them what to do, Kerry.
Well, notice to appear, I mean, certainly you have to get representation. You should interview a couple of lawyers. There are some free services out there. They're a little bit limited.
By the way, where do we find you, just so we have that now?
I'm at 212-267-2555. It's Bretz in Coven. We're right across the street from 26 Federal Plaza for the last 25 years, and bretzlaw.com.
And see you or see somebody.
Got to see somebody. There's no doubt about that.
Don't just plead out to it, especially if it's a crime or something else. But in the meantime, you're going to come back and you're going to walk us through, because this is not the last we have heard of deportation. Am I correct?
It's great. I'm glad to be here, and glad to be talking to my fellow Bronxites.
It's been a pleasure. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at www.bronxnet.tv. Also remember, if there is a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us here at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. See you next time.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.